Thank you, Becky. How many of you have seen a stereo system like the one on the cover of the Order of Service with all the stacked components? Many of us. How many of you know the significance of the numbers 33 1/3, 45, and 78? Quite a few of us old folks here in this room anyway. How many have used a stereo like that in the last 10 years? Several people. Excellent. So those stereo components used to be a big deal, and I would quite frankly covet them every time I saw them in a friend's home or on the magazines in the stores. Those various stereo components might include a tuner, a receiver for AM, FM radio. Now I should show off a little bit and say that AM and FM are amplitude modulation and frequency modulation. That's how radio waves get sent various places. You can either keep the amplitude the same and change the frequency, or you can keep the frequency the same and change the amplitude, and that's the difference between AM and FM. AM has the same frequency and different amplitudes, which is why they're not good at going through concrete on overpasses and bridges, and why your car signal loses as you go under those things. So there's a tuner, an AM FM radio, there's a cassette player. I think the one on the Order of Service has 2 cassettes, so you can record one from another. That's important if you're making Grateful Dead copies. There is probably an 8-track player. Sorry about that, they did exist. There are CD players in these systems. We have a similar CD back in the sound table there where Howard is. There's probably an EQ, a graphic equalizer. And so in your car stereo, you probably have a bass and a treble knob, or maybe it's a digital readout and has bass and treble, and you can turn up the bass or turn up the treble. The equalizer is the same thing, only instead of 2 big changes, there's like 10 of them. And you can be very specific about which things you want to listen to and which things you don't. There might be a turntable as where you put records, which are those old-timey wax things that go at 33 1/3 revolutions per minute, or 45 or 78. There's lots of ways of bringing music into our lives. I never owned much of this high-end audio equipment. I did love the music and the voices that came out of whatever device I was using. I listened to baseball games on a tiny plastic transistor radio underneath my covers well past bedtime. I had an 8-track in my car, and you'd get into this amazing guitar solo and then ka-chunk as it changed from one track to the next. I recorded my favorite songs off of the radio onto a cassette tape, and I bought a used CD player that held 25 compact discs at once. And after we would spend a day and a half cleaning our home for any party we ever threw, I would then spend 2 hours planning which 25 CDs I would put into the thing for the party. Music is a big part of my life, even the car radio. When I wasn't teaching my little sister how to drive, but I was offering her advice, which I'm sure she was really desperate for. I gave her 2 rules. Whenever you want to do something with the car, engage the clutch and never stop when the radio signal's not coming in. That's the 2 things you need to know about music in the car. I have driven a fair amount around these United States. I like listening to the local radio stations to get a flavor for what's going on in those towns and to hear new music. I play a game sometimes where I can change the channel as we go up or down the dial, but I have to listen to the whole song each time I change to the next thing. Sometimes I find stuff I really, really like, only to discover it's a genre I usually avoid. And so I have to reconsider my prejudices. And sometimes I hear stories and old radio plays. Radio is good stuff. Now, One of the cool things about AM radio, it won't penetrate concrete, as I had just said. They will bounce off clouds and go very, very long distances, especially after dark when everything is cooler. So you can listen to some AM radio sometimes from hundreds and hundreds of miles away. And that's, of course, when the late night radio programs are at their weirdest. I used to really enjoy listening to some of the alien abductions and conspiracy theories and all this stuff on late night radio. It's hard for me to do that anymore. I get too angry at them. It was fun when I thought it was just fringe and harmless. Now I know there are a lot of people who believe it and are willing to act on it. Now I see people with the bumper stickers and decals sold on those radio programs driving around in the town where I live. I was in line at an unnamed fast food restaurant. It had healthy food. And 2 vehicles ahead of me, there's a guy in a muddy Jeep with PATRIOT in big capital letters, red, white, and blue, and 2 Punisher decals. Now, Punisher, for those of you who don't know, is a Marvel Comics anti-hero who delivers violent vigilante justice in the comics. Guy didn't have just one, he had 2 to make sure you understood his stance on things. I was instantly angry. He intends those stickers to threaten people that I love. If he were a little closer, I might lean out and tell him what I think of his decals. And then I take a breath, and universalism knocks at my heart. Can you imagine that guy has inherent worth and dignity? Obviously not. He's probably and he labels stop us from thinking. We just heard Becky remind us. I am called to honor his humanity. Maybe he's driving his son's Jeep. Okay, and let's find some inherent worth in whoever put the decals on. Just living with religious conviction is not easy. Anybody else have conversations in your head like this? Is it just me? Yeah. And it seems like I'm having more of them, more often in more places. One of my all-time favorite YouTube series is Philosophy Tube. Abigail Thorne does amazing work explaining contemporary ethical and philosophical conundrums with academic rigor and a sharp wit, all while wearing some resplendent outfits. Her latest video was titled Vaccines and Freedom, and I eagerly started to play it, only to discover she was proposing that people who are voluntarily unvaccinated should be treated with compassion. I actually turned it off. I've been angry at people who didn't take the pandemic seriously, who resisted wearing masks and resisted the vaccine and thereby extended the time when I could not safely visit my family and friends for a solid 2 years now, and I was not willing to muster compassion yet. And then universalism knocks. So I entertain the possibility of compassion. And I realize the reason I feel this anger is that I'm frightened. I'm scared the people I love might get sick and die because of unvaccinated, unboosted, unmasked people giving them the virus. I'm afraid the guy in the Jeep really will harm some of my friends or me. And I don't like feeling afraid, so I get angry. And I don't really like feeling angry, so I get angrier. And then I think these people are afraid too. The guy in the Jeep is afraid that his world is changing around him, that the sacrifices he made will end up for nothing. Some of the people who were voluntarily unvaccinated were not rabid conspiracy theorists. They were legitimately concerned about the risks inherent in the science and the untrustworthiness of some of our governmental agencies. Can I get an amen? I'm afraid of them. They're afraid of other things. There's a lot of fear in the world. And that's how we get back to stereos. We humans are a bit like your typical stereo sound system. We receive input from a variety of sources. We may process those signals a little, and then we share the results through our speakers and sometimes other devices. The input we receive often depends upon which of our buttons have been pushed, and that certainly affects how we amplify our outputs. Unlike stereo receivers, where FM is frequency modulation, I often think that we humans operate on fear modulation. And it's plausible that there's some gender socialization stuff here. It might be that people socialized more yang feel fear and then react with anger on top of that, and people who are socialized more yin have anger, which they're not allowed to feel, and so they have fear on top of that. So fear or anger, it's still FM AM. I think the thing still works. Let me know afterwards if you think that's good or not. So just speaking for myself, I recognize my internal stereo system has a lot of fear modulation in it. And this is actually empowering, because the anger that I have been feeling and didn't know what to do with, my anger at them, whoever them is, gives them power over me. Now that I know it's my own fear, I can work on that. I've got more agency in that effort. I can take useful precautions to be as safe as possible, to avoid certain situations. I can learn some techniques to improve my own confidence and feel more safe. Sticking with the stereo metaphor, we can play with the EQ to engage less of certain frequencies. You can change the presets. Don't visit the channels that disturb me quite as often until I work up the strength and techniques to re-engage them at some point. I can learn meditation or other practices to eliminate the emotional feedback loops that can be so unsettling. I can be a stereo for good. I'm not a particularly high-end stereo system. I still like most of the sound I produce. And as I come to understand this instrument better, the music and ideas that I share with the world can get more and more beautiful. So may we be.